When you think about it, philosophy is pretty weird. At the end of the day, it's just people, sometimes brilliant, sometimes bizarre, and we're all trying to make sense of the immeasurable parts of our world. Morality, meaning, free will, things like that. And just for the record, there's no right or wrong answer, just different schools of thought and deeply held beliefs. I mean, think about it. Diogenes and Plato were both alive at the same time. This lack of objectivity, combined with the absurdity of the internet, has produced some of the most unhinged philosophy takes that you will ever see. Takes that'll make you mad, makes you sad, but most of all, makes you wonder. Is this person okay in the head? These are some of the worst philosophy hot takes from around the internet, and I couldn't suffer through them alone, so I brought Emeka along for the ride.
So it goes without saying that I get excited about every video that we make, but I've really been looking forward to this one. We've dealt with some very, very high concept ideas, but let's eat some junk food. So why don't we go through some pretty bad philosophy hot takes from all around the internet.
Great. Let's hear them.
Okay, so we're gonna start bang out of the gate here. I don't think you're harming someone by killing them. Okay, so I'm going to go in, no judgment. I'm just going to describe it, and then we'll get to the proper judgment. But the idea is that once someone dies, they don't exist anymore. Therefore, they'll never be able to experience anything, including harm. It's the Epicurean argument. Epicurus argued that while we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we do not exist. Ergo, while you're dead, you're not harmed. Like, you can't be harmed while you don't exist.
Yeah, I think yeah, we're definitely starting with like the red hot take. Instinctively, I want to say obviously not. I do understand where the person is coming from in terms of like a thing that does not exist cannot suffer pain. Pain and suffering is a symptom of the living, and so I do understand that. But I also think that preventing future good or future enjoyment, so to speak, is also harm. So I think, yeah, in the way of like, because when you kill someone, they're not experiencing it consciously, but it does deprive them of a future life. And so I think that it is definitely still harmful to them because it is depriving them of something that they would have, even if they do not experience, the pain of not being alive anymore. The fact that you're depriving someone of a future life, to me, is still definitely harm.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and I have to agree. Now, what I will say is you can see the thread of logic through this. There has been some thought put into it, but if you're only looking at it from an Epicurean argument, even then it's kind of hard to push that argument just because, there's the moment of harm in killing them. I'm assuming you're not just snapping your finger and off they go. But you're also, like you say, harming all future endeavor. You've cut off all their potential. And while they may not be experiencing the harm of dying, again, assuming it's completely painless and instantaneous, something bad is, you are still harming them. When I was reading through this, the example I thought up is, I don't know if there's anyone out there, I'm not guilty of it, but if you, at some point you took your parents' credit card and you got something that you really wanted to buy, and they never found out, you got away with it. You still did something harmful to them, just in the same way that this person that you're killing would never know that the harm was being done onto them. It would still be done to them. So I don't think this one passes muster. I think by killing someone, you are in fact harming them.
I think that analogy of taking your parents' credit card, I think it's perfect. Even if they never like figure out that, some of their money is missing, it's like, what if they were saving for a house and then, they can't buy that house again? It's like what you did in the past, even though they don't know that their money is missing, still means that they cannot get something in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the perfect example for that. Please don't go around, unaliving people.
Aperture does not endorse murder, as if we even have to say that.
Yeah, we started off pretty strong, and now this one is something that can actually put our entire channel to rest. And it's basically that philosophy without real life use is worthless. So basically what the person said is philosophy that we cannot directly apply to real life situations is pretty worthless.
Oh, I just finished this thing about stoicism and how I'm supposed to take everything, like, don't put emotion into it. So I'm not. But I'll just start with this. Fundamentally, I don't think there's any useless experience, and philosophy is very much an experience. And I could be wrong, but I feel like this is coming from the same people who say, oh, art is useless, or movies are useless, or video games, or experiences that aren't dedicated to building the world up, like on a structural level, are useless. And that's just fundamentally wrong from my perspective. Every experience you undergo is a step towards building you up, even if it's not a structural experience. Even if it's just something that makes you happy for a day or, gets you through a bad week, I think it's fundamentally useful as an experience. And the same goes for philosophy. We build entire mental frameworks on how we want to go through life and interact with other people in the world on this. And saying that that's useless, I think it's hasty, to say the least, and almost dangerous in the extreme.
Honestly, I agree with you a lot. And I think, this kind of comes from, like you said, the same people who say, you have to do everything to maximize shareholder revenue. It's like, you can't even have hobbies these days if it's not like a side hustle or a side income or things like that. I think, it very much minimizes the human experience because, you would never tell a bird that it should only sing if it actually wants to get a mate. It feels like everything has to have like a tangible purpose in terms of like creating something or, building up the world or anything like that. But I think even in the tangible sense, I think philosophy still helps people. And I think this is definitely like a more modern thing where philosophy and philosophers, they are very much under-respected. They're definitely respected a lot less than they were before, because before, even like people who do the hard sciences were called like philosophers of science. They were thought of as philosophers as well, because when you think of people like Aristotle or people like Isaac Newton, who the earth is not in the center of the universe, that started out from a philosophical point of view of trying to understand the world conceptually before it became like a hard science of like actually finding the proof that, okay, the sun is in the center of the universe. So I think people who say, oh, like if the philosophy does not have a usefulness like immediately, then it's worthless, are probably the same people who would say like applied mathematics does not have any use, because why are you trying to look for imaginary numbers if they don't have any use right now?
Yeah.
But they kind of fail to understand that, sometimes we don't know what these things will be used for 10, 20, 30 years down the line. A lot of the best things that humans have made have come from experiments that have failed.
Yeah.
And then something else happens. And then something else is created out of us. We don't only build on the success of others, we also build on the failures. We build on the things that don't work. We build on the ideas. I think there is definitely a huge part of philosophy that should be immediately applicable to life. I don't think we should like compress philosophy into self-help.
Yeah.
Essentially, we can think about things that don't have immediate usefulness in life.
I resonate with that. We don't judge science on all the failures or all the, the bad ideas. And I don't think there's a perfect anything in our universe. We haven't had a perfect science. We haven't had a perfect philosophy. So that view that philosophy isn't perfect, it's not the perfect explanation for anything, well, of course not. Science isn't even a perfect explanation for anything yet. We're still coming up with theories that are, credibly backed, and then we run the tests and say, oh, well, that's not actually the case. But that, it's the step-by-step process that we go through as human beings in understanding science to the universe and philosophy to ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the perfect boat, definitely.
I think the last two, we've been pretty ready and able to swat them down, but I think this one's going to be fun to talk about, actually. The TLDR of it, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail, is that optimistic nihilism is a nice new fad that largely isn't true and contradicts itself. So just as an intro to anyone who is wondering what the heck we're talking about, optimistic nihilism, it's a growing philosophical idea. It accepts that life is inherently meaningless, Ergo, we have the ability and we have the right and even the responsibility to create our own meaning on an empty canvas. It criticizes the contradictory nature of finding a meaning when nihilism posits that there is no meaning to be found. So I think the issue that this point has is that nihilism says no meaning, and we say, well, okay, we get that, no inherent meaning, let's make our own.
If the other ones are hot takes, I'll say maybe this one is sort of lukewarm.
Yeah.
Because I do understand fully where the person is coming from. I also think, especially because, you also have existentialism and absurdism. I think those three philosophies sort of, they're playing around the same ballpark, and it's very difficult to find the hard lines in the sand between all three of them. And we've actually done an entire video on the channel about it, which you guys can check out, just trying to explain the differences between those three things. What I would say is something that I learned from Marcus Aurelius, and that is that philosophy does not have to have a hard line in the sand. Because I think essentially this person's problem is that, existentialism already exists, because that's why they're saying, optimistic nihilism is just a fad. Existentialism exists, just be an existentialist. But I think, philosophy does not have to have hard lines in the sand. It's supposed to, be kind of like the rainbow. There's no place where red stops and orange begins. They all just kind of flow into each other. So yeah, obviously you would have things that are kind of on the edge of two different philosophies. I don't think it needs to be shunned out because of that. And speaking of the contradiction, I don't necessarily think that it contradicts itself. Because to me, what optimistic nihilism is saying is that the world does not have a meaning. Okay, the world does not have a meaning, but I would take pride in the fact that I can make of the world whatever it is that I want.
Yeah.
Just to use a single line to kind of differentiate them, existentialism does not say that the world does not have any meaning. An existentialist says that the world does have meaning, but you have to create that meaning yourself. An absurdist says that F everything, I'm just going to party my life away. I don't care about anything. An absurdist does not care. He say the world makes no sense. It's not saying the world has no meaning. It's saying the world makes no sense. But an optimistic nihilist is saying the world makes no sense, but that's not a bad thing. So I think there's a slight difference there. So I don't think that necessarily is a contradiction. You can be happy even if something doesn't, you're saying, yeah, there's no meaning there, but I will take my own meaning in the fact that there is no meaning there, and I'll be happy about that. I don't think it's necessarily a contradiction. But what do you think?
Well, you used the term absurd nihilism, and for anyone who doesn't know, I am an unabashed Camus fanboy. Annoyed my friends a lot about that. But I think they're one step off from kind of that little golden nugget at the core of absurd nihilism, because, there is a contradiction. So trying to find meaning is absurd, which is the point. That is the point of absurd nihilism. You're saying any meaning I make in a meaningless system will also be meaningless. Yes, we'll do the absurd thing and do it anyway, because it's better to be like that. It's heroic nihilism was also the term, where against all odds of logic and philosophical reasoning, you're still managing to create meaning for yourself. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Saying it's a contradiction kind of goes against, a bit what Camus wrote. And, I'm just reminded of his essay about the myth of Sisyphus, and saying that, Sisyphus should consider himself happy. And, optimistic nihilism kind of gives me that vibe of Sisyphus must consider himself happy. He knows that there is no purpose and no end to all of these things he's doing. But at the end of the day, it's kind of you're still better suited having a positive reaction to that reality than a negative one. I understand what the person was getting at, which is why I said it's not, as crazy as the first two, but I still think that optimistic nihilism is definitely, important for a lot of people. And I wouldn't just bash it because of some trying to draw some arbitrary lines in the sand.
Yeah, you know what? I think you hit it on the head with that Sisyphus reference.
So we're going back to the crazy. And this one says ethics is just about forcing people to conform. And basically the idea is that normative ethics boils down to the desire to homogenize. Basically, if we can't homogenize, then we force others to conform via things like punishment and rehabilitation, prison and all of that things. But yeah, the point the person is trying to make is that trying to prescribe anything such like a societal ethics is an attempt to make people conform.
Yeah, I think I fundamentally disagree with that. I can see the logical inroads that they take. From a certain viewpoint, you could look at ethics like moral imperialism. You're trying to impose your own viewpoints and your own standards onto other people. But ethics grew out of the seed of, boy, I would sure like to leave my house without being murdered. Not a lot of people like being killed. A lot of people don't like having their stuff stolen. A lot of people don't like suffering the pain of violence, etc., etc. That is the fundamental crux of what all ethics has grown out of. It's how do people want and not want to be treated. And I think imposing that on that is just a fundamental tenet of society. I don't really have an issue with ethics in that regard. Here's an example. So a dictator wakes up one day and expresses a need to eliminate certain undesirable groups, whether they're ideologies or people. And it's a small number of the population. And it would be considered ethical under this hot take since it helps with a greater goal of homogenization.
I think, yes, stuff like this, is a kind of, if you push it too far enough and say, okay, ethics is only about societal conformity and homogenization, it kind of enters into, defense of pretty terrible policies like governmental policies, and, bad treatment of things like immigration and people of that nature, because, you have this view that the entire society is supposed to be homogenized. So if that was what ethics was about, then you wouldn't have people openly expressing their disgust for things like this, because at the end of the day it helps homogeneity. So I don't think ethics is just about that. Plus I think like you said, I think that explanation of ethics is just about forcing people to conform does not explain why we feel this like guttural hatred for things like murder and genocide and slavery and all these very terrible things. In my opinion, there's something fundamentally biological, fundamentally human about hating all of these things. And I don't think that can, because society comes after biology, not the other way around. So I don't think we can say ethics is only about conforming if we've had ethics before the need to conform as a society in the first place. Society came because we had ethics. I think because humans could come together and say, okay, I wouldn't take your stuff, you won't take my stuff, you won't kill me, I won't kill you. Ethics sort of like created that. It created a social bond between humans, which made us rise up the food chain. So I think it's actually in reverse. So yeah, definitely don't agree with this hot take.
Yeah, definitely not. And just putting my last points on that. We're able to make a society because of a system of ethics that we normalized into laws. And again, the intention was never to create a homogenous unit. The intention was always to create a well-functioning and safe society. Not many people are going to argue against that. It's the social contract, as Thomas Locke says. We give up a few freedoms, individual freedoms, in order to function better and more safely as a whole.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we put that one to bed. Here's one we're going to have to talk through, because on the surface, I'll give it credit here, it does have some teeth. And the point that they're trying to make is philosophy doesn't contribute anything to our understanding of the natural world. And yeah, you spend at least a couple seconds thinking, and it's like, well, we're talking about how we as humans go through things, or we haven't talked about how the rainforests work, or what climate change is all about, or what the Coriolis effect does. They're trying to make the point that philosophy doesn't really help us understand the nuts and bolts of the world around us. What do you think about that?
If this take was more so limited to like saying something like, oh, new age philosophy, then maybe I would understand that, because now philosophy and science are a lot more divided. So yeah, I would probably say, okay, maybe not a hot take, but if we're looking at throughout the history of time, then I would say definitely I don't agree with the take. And I think the perfect example is Aristotle's four causes. Aristotle proposed a way to understand why something exists and why it happens in nature, to basically explain natural phenomena. And this was before we had the scientific method and the scientific way of thinking. And according to Aristotle, before you can understand the purpose or why a thing happens, you have to understand its material cause, which is what is it made of materially, physically. Then you have to understand its formal cause, which is the form and the pattern of the thing. Then you have to understand the efficient cause, which is the agent or process that it brings about, like what does it cause essentially, and then the final cause, which is the purpose or function that it serves. And out of those 4 different causes and purposes, the only thing that scientists don't use anymore today is the final cause, because right now we think more in terms of like the mechanistic cause. We don't use the term final cause again. But the remaining 3 are still used in the core of science today, and all of them, like, they came from philosophical thought, from people thinking about how the world could work and proposing these ideas that are now used in actual science. Another one that we have, things like Descartes, is mind-body dualism, which is still, considered a bit controversial, but it's one of the things that made us sit and actually consider the mind-body problem and start to ask questions about consciousness scientifically, and trying to look into the neuroscience of how the brain and the mind work. This was all started because one man thought and said, oh, I think there I am. Like, he had a philosophical thought that has eventually led to us trying to understand more about the nature of humanity using those scientific tools. So I don't think it's really, I don't think it's right. Honestly, I don't think this take is right. I think there are definitely there's some branch of philosophy that focuses too much on asking questions and everything. And I do think that's important as well. But I don't think it's, right to say all of philosophy does not help in any way.
I mean, you just knocked it out of the park on the structural reasoning, so I'm not going to hammer a nail that's already in, but I'll go from a different viewpoint on, how and why philosophy is actually really important for understanding the natural world, in that philosophy is our way of understanding ourselves. It's understanding how we think and move through the natural world as members of the natural world. Understanding ourselves is only the first step, naturally, but once we understand ourselves, we can then go on to, we can then understand how we perceive the natural world, because anything we do to define it will always be through our own lens. We'll never be 100% objective, but at the very least, we'll be able to understand it, and we'll have the philosophical framework to understand ourselves and then understand that world around us.
Yeah, perfect. I think they perfectly encapsulate what I was trying to say.
You did most of the work. All right, so this one is, it's not a modern problem, but we've definitely been seeing it coming up in the memosphere. I think 2 or 3 years ago, we started seeing or even longer than that, the trolley problem has been coming up in the public discourse again. So this hot take says the trolley problem is pointless without more information on the people. For anyone who doesn't know, the trolley problem is you stand at a lever, you're the conductor, and there's a trolley rattling down the tracks at high speed, violent, harmful speeds. And you have a choice. You can pull the lever, which will divert it onto one track, or you can keep the lever the same and it'll stay on the same track that it's going. Problem is, on one track, there's 3 people. On the other track, there's 1 person. And it asks the question, what is more ethical, killing 3 people or 1 person? And what do you, as the agent who organizes that shift, what is your ethical responsibility in that position? People have been talking about it for years, and I have a feeling we will continue to talk about it. But let's bust this hot take down before we get too into the weeds on this one.
I think in a sort of ironic twist, this person has proved, in an effort to say the trolley problem is pointless, the person has proved perfectly the point of the trolley problem. This take kind of comes from, like you said, the mimification of the trolley problem, where people, say what if the 1 person is your child and the 5 people are this? I think a lot of that, it makes interesting discussions, but I don't think it particularly gets to the point of the trolley problem.
Yeah.
The problem is, if we start giving descriptions for who exactly these people are, their hair color, their skin color, all of these things, we start to enter very treacherous waters, where we're saying that, the things that make people human are more than the basic dignity of being a human. You kind of start going into the thing of do we sacrifice the elderly for the young? Do we sacrifice a woman who is not pregnant for a woman who is pregnant? Because you kind of start going into all these places where we're starting to say human dignity alone is not enough. we kind of have to dress this person up, and we kind of have to say, okay, this. And I think, yeah, it just gets very disturbing, honestly, when you start, putting these people up against each other in a way.
There's obviously the, well, some people are more important than others argument, which is abhorrent. But I think by trying to explain who those people on the tracks are, you invalidate the trolley problem as a whole. The trolley problem is all about, you don't know who these people are. So how do you make the ethical choice? And it's never been about who they are. It's been about, is it more ethical to save 3 people or 1? A utilitarian will say, well, 3 people. Whereas I forget the name of the branch right now, which is embarrassing.
Yeah.
They would say, well, they all have equal value, so you're making the choice to kill 1 person, and then the whole crux of it generates from you not knowing who they are. So saying it's pointless without information is, I just don't feel like they thought the problem out enough.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, just to remind you, I think what you're looking for is deontological. Utilitarian says that it depends on the outcome. Meanwhile, the ontological says that right is right, wrong. You explained it perfectly. That is the point of the trolley problem, is trying to figure out, if we strip away of these things that cloud our judgment, because the trolley problem is not trying to say, would you save your kid or 3 random people you don't know. Like, that's not a problem. Obviously, like 99% of people would save their kid. The trolley problem is trying to say, if we strip away all these regular societal expectations that make us make choices, and it's down to just the fundamental ethics, what choice do we make? Do we go with, trying to get the best outcome possible, or do we simply say, me as a person, I'm objectively moral, and I would not partake in anything that I believe to be morally subjective, no matter the outcome? That is the point of the trolley problem. The point of the trolley problem is not trying to ask you if you would save your cat or random strangers. So yeah, I think that this is probably, it might even be the worst take, because I think it just completely misses the point of the trolley problem. It's it just shows that the person doesn't even understand the trolley problem and why it was created and its usefulness in the first place. If you think that we need to know every single detail about them for it to matter. So
yeah, I
definitely
that. It gets a little gold medal for worst take.
So those were a few of the hot takes on philosophy from around the internet. And honestly, I'd love to do this again. So audience, our beloved audience, if you know any other hot takes, please, give us another good video. Send all of your amazing philosophy hot takes down in the comments below, because I guarantee you we would love to see them.